Good evening. Today is Sunday, September 1st, 2024. This morning we had a good service at the Bethel AME Church in Corsicana. The first Sunday is Communion Sunday. We had communion and we sought to minister to the sick and shut in. It's been a very busy day serving the Lord. I want to go back in time 50 years to this day in 1974. It's interesting that this day in 1974 was also on a Sunday. During that particular time in my life, I was living in my hometown of Waco at 1015 Spate. That was a few blocks from the campus of Baylor University. I completed my BA from Baylor in 1973 and was working on my MA degree in Church State Studies at Baylor at the time. I had completed my classwork in May of 74, and I had started work on my master's thesis on the Nation of Islam. I was working at Barron's Incorporated, a wholesale drug distributing company, which I understand was one of the oldest businesses in Waco. They are no longer in business, from what I understand. And sadly, that apartment where I lived, where I have so many memories, is no longer standing. It was removed a number of years back to make room for some high rises. That's not my idea of progress. But anyway, we have, at that time, I was a member of St. Mary's Baptist Church, area called No Man's Land, is now known as Lincoln Park, between Waco and Belle Meade. It pastor was the late Reverend Dewey Pinckney, who served on the city council, a good friend of mine. I joined the AME Church in 1975. And so, always active in a lot of things, both church and Masonically, working on my thesis and working 40 hours a week, packing boxes at a wholesale distributor. I stayed busy. It was on the day before, on August 31st, that Saturday. I was at the Baylor Library working on my thesis, and I used a payphone. Anybody remember payphones? That was before the day of cell phones. And so um, this was uh, payphones are almost extinct now, but I used a payphone to call my mother. And she informed me she had received a phone call from a lady who was at one time the secretary for the Baptist Student Union at MCC, McLennan Community College. I attended MCC from 1969 to 1971, and during my last year there, I served as president of the BSU. Well, the lady informed us a member of the BSU at the time, a classmate of ours, had passed away. And of course, I was very sorry to hear that. And I got more information from her and telephoned the man who had been the director of the BSU at the time. Was no longer holding that position. And of course, he was also sorry to hear about the death of this lady at the age of 24. It was really sad. Anyway, the next day I traveled from Waco to Howard, Texas, which is near Italy in Ellis County. I preached that day at the New Bethel Baptist Church. According to the Handbook of Texas Online, Howard is on Farm Road 984, 4 miles south of Lake Waxahachie in southeastern Ellis County. Settlement of the community may have occurred in the late 1880s. Postal service began in 1896, and 10 years later, the post office closed. Throughout its history, Howard has served area farmers as a school and church community. Its population reached 100 in the early 1930s when it had 1 to 3 businesses. For the next 30 years, the population changed little. Beginning in the mid-1960s, however, the number of residents dropped abruptly to 20. In 1990, Howard had an estimated 26 residents. There was a Reverend Gibbon Walker who lived in Fort Worth, who was pastor of New Bethel. He gave me his card, and I called and arranged to preach for him that Sunday. I do remember that we sat, and he and another minister, I believe his name was Reverend Craig, the three of us sat in the office for a good while before the service started. And if I remember right, it was after 12, before the church even started. Finally, we were just laughing, cutting up, and he hollered out, "Hey, deacon, get that prayer meeting started." So they did, and we had a good time. They had dinner afterward, and my sermon went over very well. I left there and would not return for 20 years. Well, actually, longer than that, 40 years. I do remember in the 1980s attending a service at Mount Zion AME Church in Italy, Texas. And there were a number of preachers there, and there was one Baptist pastor from Italy. They had churches listed on the program, including the church at Howard. And there was a Reverend Walker pastoring there, but I was told by Reverend Square that the old man Walker had died and his son had succeeded him as pastor. Sadly, by 2014, the church not only closed, but the building had been torn down. And I have made numerous efforts to find contact with people who were there back then, and they've been all unsuccessful. I preached at Mount Zion AME Church in Italy, and I preached a number of times at St. John Baptist Church in Avalon, which is on the road, it's on 34 between Italy and Ennis. I was pastor at Wayman Chapel AME Church in Ennis for 14 years. But I never was able to make contact with anybody, and I don't know if there's anybody left who was a member there. But on September 1st, 2014, 10 years ago today, Labor Day, I went back to Howard. My grandson took some pictures of me. This was 40 years after my visit there. This was on a Monday. And from Howard Jen. About the only business that's left there. And from Howard water co-op. And I've driven through there a few times since, but I do have fond memories of Reverend Gibbon Walker and of New Bethel Baptist Church. It's unfortunate I had no more contact with him after that. But time waits for no one. On September 2nd of 1974, I went and gave condolences to the family of this classmate who had passed, and I went to the funeral home for the viewing. The funeral was on the following day, Tuesday, September 2nd, or September 3rd. It was, September 2nd was the Monday, Labor Day, and September 3rd, I had to go back to work, and so I didn't attend the service. But interesting times. Just so happens that, that was on September 1st I was talking about. Exactly 1 week later, Sunday, September 8th, after attending morning service at the Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C., President Gerald Ford called a press conference and issued a pardon to former President Richard Nixon. And that was the big news. That may have kept Ford from getting reelected in 1976. It was one of the main factors, probably not the only factor. Very eventful year in the world and in my life. I would remain at Barron's Drug Company for the next few months until December of 1974, which my career would really begin when I moved from Waco to Teague and began work for the Texas Department of Public Welfare, which is now Health and Human Services. I would stay in Teague for a little over 2 years and meet my wife, Deborah, in Fairfield, her hometown. It's been quite a journey, and I thank God for being with me every step of the way. So that's a trip down memory lane to Sunday, August the 1st of 1974. And again, God bless Reverend Gibbon Walker. God bless New Bethel Baptist Church and everybody else that I mentioned in this video. Have a good evening. Have a happy Labor Day.